Ibrahim Traoré had been in power for a while now. Some called him a rebel. Others called him hope. To the youth, he was the man who finally said no. No to foreign troops. No to foreign control. No to leaders who looked outside before looking at their own people. He wasn't soft-spoken. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. And he didn't smile when cameras flashed. But he had one thing that made him dangerous. He meant what he said. And in today's world, that's more dangerous than any weapon. The ECOWAS leaders didn't say much in public. They rarely do. But behind closed doors, there was movement. Calls. Pressure. Private jets landing quietly in places they shouldn't. Nobody said the word coup out loud. Not yet. But the decisions were already being made. The kind of decisions where signatures don't matter. Only silence. Traoré knew. Not everything, but enough. He started watching his own men closely, cut off some lines of communication, changed routines, stayed up later, because something was coming, something real. And the people, they felt it. You could see it in how they walked. Faster, eyes down, not in fear of their government, no, but because the air felt thick like a storm rolling in. It hadn't started yet, but deep inside the system, somebody had already struck the match. And in just a few days, Africa would see the fire. The first real sign didn't make headlines. It wasn't a gunshot. It wasn't a protest. It was a phone call picked up by mistake. A military officer in Burkina Faso's northern command had tapped into a secured channel meant only for external contact. The signal came through garbled at first, but then it cleared. Two voices. French accents. Calm. Measured. And then, one word stood out. Replacement. They weren't talking about plans. They were talking about people. About positions. About what would happen after Traoré was removed. That night, the report was handed to the president in a sealed envelope. No emails. No texts. Just ink on paper. And when he read it, he said nothing for a full minute. Then he asked one question. Who else knows? Within 48 hours, Traoré's closest team was in lockdown. Communications froze. He canceled public events. Diplomatic meetings were pushed back. The silence returned, but now it was loaded. It wasn't fear. It was planning. Across the border, in Dakar, something else was happening. A group of ECOWAS-linked officers met in a private compound. No uniforms. No national flags. Just suits. And behind closed doors, they laid out a timeline. Day 1, misinformation. Day 2, destabilization. Day 3, removal. Simple, clean, quick. The idea wasn't to fight a war. The idea was to remove a man and make it look like Burkina Faso did it to itself. The codename for the mission was short, ECHO, because once it started, it would spread to Mali, to Niger, to Guinea. Any country that stood with Traoré would feel the same pressure. And they had help. A French-linked aid group had recently flown in equipment for humanitarian use. Inside the crates? Radio jammers, GPS blockers, covert listening tools. It was supposed to be clean, fast, invisible. But something went wrong. A soldier, one of Traoré's younger recruits, noticed the crates weren't tagged right. He followed protocol, opened them, and saw what wasn't supposed to be seen. He didn't call command. He didn't ask questions. He took photos, drove through the night, and showed up at the gates of the presidential compound with dust on his boots and fear in his eyes. When Traoré saw the images, he didn't blink. He simply said, "We have 3 days." Phones were now tapped, movements tracked, and one by one, names started appearing. A colonel in Bobo Dioulasso, a senior commander in Ghana, a retired general from Nigeria, and one civilian with a diplomatic passport from France. The web wasn't just military. It was financial, political, media. The plan wasn't just to remove a president. It was to rewrite a narrative. Make it look like he failed. Make it look like the people turned on him. Make it look like a rescue. But it wasn't going to happen quietly. Because this time, they were not the only ones watching. Traoré had already sent quiet orders to every unit that mattered. No speeches. No warnings. Just a message. Stand by. Don't move. Wait for my signal. And then he waited, for the right moment, for the first crack, because he knew, if he moved too soon, they'd say he was paranoid. If he moved too late, he'd be gone. 3 days. That's all they had, to stop a coup before it ever made the news. And the countdown had already begun. They thought he would panic. They thought he'd start firing blindly, make a scene, lose control. But Traoré didn't move fast. He moved quiet. The streets of Ouagadougou looked the same, but they weren't. Checkpoints doubled overnight. Traffic slowed near government buildings. Some roads were under repair, but no one saw workers. What you did see were eyes, watching, measuring. The airport had delays. Technical issues, they said, but in truth, every passenger list was now being scanned. Every foreign name flagged. Every diplomat tracked from the moment they landed. One van, registered to a French medical charity, was stopped outside the city. Inside the van, laptops, surveillance gear, a suitcase of unmarked dollars. They said it was for relief. No one believed them. And still, ECOWAS stayed silent. No official statements. No press conferences. Just calm faces on TV. But the silence was loud. Meanwhile, inside Traoré's compound, walls were being covered in maps. Satellite images. Names. Dates. And one large red circle around a date, just 2 days away. His advisors urged him to speak. Call a press conference. Show strength. He refused. No, he said. They expect that. Let them keep thinking I'm in the dark. Behind the scenes, trusted officers were moved. Phones were replaced. 3 men from the president's inner circle were quietly sent home. No explanation. Later, it turned out 2 of them were involved. In the capital, whispers turned to tension. People stayed home longer. Markets opened late. Barbershops, normally full of loud talk, grew quiet. And in the night, Traoré didn't sleep. He sat by himself in a small room with a single lamp and a recorder, listening to clips, replaying conversations, waiting for one final confirmation. It came at 2:14 a.m. A voice, Nigerian accent, said, "We strike at dawn. Make it look internal." The audio was real, raw. He played it back 5 times, then leaned forward and whispered, "Good, now we know." And just like that, the silence broke. Not in the streets, not with bullets, but in his eyes. Because when morning came, he wasn't planning defense. He was preparing something else, something they didn't see coming. The next day felt different. Not louder, not busier, just heavier. People didn't say it out loud, but they felt it in their bodies. Shops opened late. Some never opened at all. Old men sat outside without speaking. Radios played music, but nobody danced. At 10:03 a.m., a military drone hovered over a compound on the edge of the capital. From the outside, it looked abandoned. But inside, it held the operation's nerve center, screens, files, foreign accents, speaking fast, nervous. The drone fed a live signal straight to the president. And when he saw who was there, he didn't blink. One face in particular, an ECOWAS official, long retired, sitting with headphones on. Another, an intelligence advisor from a neighboring country, flipping through a folder with Burkina's military ranks inside. Names, positions, photos. It wasn't rumor anymore. It was real, documented, visual. At noon, 3 armored trucks rolled through the center of Ouagadougou without explanation. No sirens, no announcements, just presence. They stopped outside a well-known hotel. Inside that hotel, 2 men with diplomatic immunity, one from Europe, one from West Africa. Both were escorted out quietly. Still, no press. Still, no speeches. Just the quiet sound of control shifting back into the hands of the president. By late afternoon, social media started buzzing. Someone had leaked footage from the drone. People shared it in pieces, blurred photos, muted audio, the sound of nervous men making dangerous plans. And with every share, the people started putting the pieces together. This wasn't just a coup. This was coordination. From outside, with inside help, to remove a man who refused to kneel. In Mali, people lit candles for Traoré. In Niger, students marched through the streets, shouting his name. In Guinea, graffiti showed up on walls overnight. One Africa. One stand. The moment was shifting, and the plotters could feel it. They had planned for soldiers. They had planned for resistance. But they hadn't planned for the people. They hadn't planned for eyes everywhere. At 6:47 p.m., Traoré finally stood up from his seat. He walked to the small radio room where he'd been monitoring calls for hours, and with a calm, low voice, he said 3 words into a private channel. Lock it down. Every phone tower, airport route, and military post went into controlled freeze. Nobody in, nobody out. They thought they'd caught him sleeping. But Traoré had been watching the whole time. And now, it was his move. By midnight, the city was still. Not dead, just waiting. Soldiers moved like shadows. No shouting, no sirens, no panic. Just orders being followed. Quietly. Exactly as planned. The presidential compound had doubled its perimeter. Inside, only 12 men were allowed in the war room. 12 men who had been vetted, tested, watched. Not over months, over years. Every detail of the coup had now been confirmed. Who funded it? Who approved it? Who would take over once Traoré disappeared? And the most important name? A colonel from within Burkina Faso's own military. Decorated, respected, but bought. He had been promised safety, promised power, promised a new flag. He didn't know Traoré had known his name for a week. Didn't know every meeting had been traced. Didn't know his escape plan had already been blocked. At 3:02 a.m., the colonel sent a coded message. Go. But it never made it. The line was intercepted mid-transmission. By the time his phone went dark, soldiers had already surrounded the compound where he was hiding. They didn't go in yet. They waited, because Traoré had one more thing to do. At 5:14 a.m., Burkina Faso state TV went black. No programming, no music, just static. And then, slowly, the screen lit up. It showed one chair. One man, sitting, calm, hands folded. President Traoré looked directly into the camera. He didn't smile. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, I know what you've done. I know who paid you. I know the countries you used, the weapons you hid, the men you turned. I have the tapes. I have the proof. And I am still here. He paused. Then he said, Africa is not your playground. Not anymore. And if you think we'll stay silent while you choose our leaders for us, you are wrong. This land does not kneel. The broadcast cut out. But that was enough. Within minutes, the streets erupted. Not in panic. In power. People came out in their thousands. Flags waved. Voices shouted. And in every corner of the country, you could hear the same 3 words. He's still here. And across West Africa, something started to shift. Because in that moment, people weren't just watching. They were choosing. And they were choosing him. The colonel didn't try to fight. He tried to flee. Disguised as a medical patient, he was loaded into an old ambulance headed toward the southern border. 2 others rode with him. Faces unfamiliar, but passports said diplomatic advisors. Forged, French, and nervous. The vehicle didn't make it far. At the checkpoint, just 19 kilometers from the Ghana border, it was stopped. The soldier who approached didn't shout, didn't raise his weapon. He simply looked through the window and said, Step out, please. They hesitated, but they stepped out. Inside the truck, false compartments, radio jammers, backup phones, and a sealed envelope with escape codes. Their plan had crumbled, and they knew it. The colonel said nothing. He just stared at the ground, his hands trembling. They were taken back to Ouagadougou under heavy guard. No media, no parade, just 3 men and a country that had caught them mid-lie. Back in the capital, Traoré didn't call a press conference. He didn't gloat. Instead, he sat with the 3 men in a private room. No cameras, no press, just eyes. He said to them, You could have spoken. You could have warned me. Instead, you sold your names. And you thought the people wouldn't see. Then he stood, opened the door, and walked out. Minutes later, state TV ran one clip, just one. It showed the passports, the radio devices, the hidden cash, and then a still photo of the colonel, looking straight ahead like a man who realized too late what side of history he'd chosen. The reaction was immediate. Nigeria called for calm and review. Ghana issued a vague statement about misunderstandings. France? Silent. Not a word. The African Union scheduled an emergency meeting. Half the member states didn't show up. But the people, they showed up. In Mali, thousands gathered around public squares, holding signs that read, No more puppets. In Niger, young men climbed on rooftops waving flags. Burkinas, Malis, Guineas, together. And in every country where foreign hands had played quiet games, people started asking the same question. If they did it there, are they doing it here too? The world tried to move on, but Africa wasn't ready to forget. Because something had broken. Not the coup, not the state, something deeper, the illusion. And now, all eyes were on what Traoré would do next. Because the coup had failed, but the message was clear. They would try again. Traoré didn't rush. He didn't stand on a podium. He didn't wave flags or throw victory parades. Instead, he spent the next 48 hours in closed-door meetings with regional allies, military heads, and youth leaders. He knew the cameras were waiting. He knew the West was watching. But he wasn't interested in applause. He was interested in something else, stability. On the third night after the failed coup, he finally appeared again, this time not in uniform. No beret, just a plain shirt, no decorations. And he stood in front of the nation, not to threaten, but to explain. He spoke calmly, slowly, like someone speaking directly to the people, not over them. What happened here was not just about Burkina Faso. It was about control, about who gets to decide what Africa becomes. And I want to be clear, this wasn't just political. This was spiritual. This was about dignity. He paused, let the room stay quiet. Then he said, they tried to remove me, not because I was corrupt, not because I betrayed the people, but because I told them no. And when an African leader says no, they see it as a threat. He lifted a folder, held it in both hands. Inside this folder are the documents. Wire transfers, voice recordings, flight logs. I'm not giving them to journalists. I'm giving them to the people. Because you deserve to know who betrayed you. And why? The room didn't clap. They just listened. Because it wasn't a show. It was real. The next day, digital files were released publicly, online, at libraries, at universities. Open to all. Nothing hidden. Names were confirmed. Some ECOWAS officials. A few businessmen. 1 or 2 respected international advisors. Now exposed for what they truly were. But Traoré didn't stop there. He called for something new. A security alliance. Not based on foreign troops. Not dependent on loans or handshakes from across the ocean. He called it the Sahel Sovereign Force. Made up of soldiers from Mali, Niger, Guinea, and Burkina Faso. Trained at home. Equipped at home. Loyal to no foreign government. He said, if we are going to defend our land, we must do it with our own feet. That sentence spread across West Africa like wildfire. It was printed on posters, spoken in schools, painted on city walls. Even in countries not officially involved, young people started to whisper, maybe it's time. The message had landed, not just in Burkina Faso, but across the continent. Traoré had done more than survive a coup. He had shown what was possible when a leader chose his people over power. And in doing so, he changed the conversation. From fear to choice. From silence to something louder. The kind of voice that doesn't need permission. The kind that says, Africa decides. Weeks passed. The dust settled. But the echoes of what happened didn't fade. In the markets, people still talked about that night. The speech. The calm way Traoré looked into the camera and spoke like he wasn't afraid of anyone. That stayed with them. In the schools, students debated the documents he released. Not just the names, but what those names meant. What it said about leadership, about trust, about how deep the reach of foreign influence had grown, and how close they had come to losing something they didn't even know they had. Across Africa, leaders grew quiet. Some canceled trips. Others suddenly became unavailable for interviews. But the people, they got louder. Not with noise, but with clarity. They started asking real questions. They started looking harder at who sat in the big chairs. Traoré didn't declare victory. He didn't put up banners. He just kept working, meeting with youth groups, reviewing military plans, strengthening ties with Mali, Niger, Guinea. And then, one more speech. It wasn't broadcast with music or flags. It was just him, in a plain shirt again, standing in front of a room full of young people. He said, they thought we would fall. Not just me, but all of us, this generation, this continent. They planned for our silence. But instead, they got our voice. He paused, looked at the room. I don't want to be a hero. I don't want statues. I want a future that isn't controlled by fear. A future where no African child has to grow up feeling small in their own land. He took a breath. One final line. This time we stood. Next time we build. That speech wasn't played once. It was played again and again. On phones. On radios. In churches. In classrooms. And slowly, it stopped being just about him. It became about all of them. All of us. Because something changed. Not just in Burkina Faso, but across the continent. A crack had formed in the old way of doing things. And through that crack, a new kind of light began to shine. One that didn't ask permission. One that didn't need approval. One that said, Africa has had enough. And Africa is awake.